This is ANCAP-SU, and we're going to talk now about the meeting between Trump and Putin that took place yesterday in Alaska and ended with absolutely no developments. As I was saying in my videos on Mundo M Revolução, this wasn't going to lead to anything. There was no chance they would reach any agreement on peace, and this was a good outcome for Ukraine. Because the truth is that if there had been a quote-unquote peace agreement here, it would have been a bad peace agreement for Ukraine. The fact that they didn't reach any peace agreement is a good sign. Putin didn't agree to back down, and Trump didn't agree to abandon Ukraine. This is good news in the end. I think it's another step for Trump to realize that the only option he has in this war is to arm Ukraine. There's no other option he can pursue if his interest is the future of the United States. Of course, some people think Trump is an agent of Krasnov, a Russian agent. I never really believed in that theory. But if that's not the case, if he really wants what's best for the United States, the only option he has is to arm Ukraine. Let's see what happens in the coming days, and let's talk about what happened yesterday. And remember that every day I make a video on Mundo M Revolução discussing the war in Ukraine. And I'll be discussing this topic in more detail there, okay? This news was suggested by Peter Turguniev, I'm Sapelin, Colorado, and several other people, thanks to everyone who suggested news on our website, Libertarian.com. And thank you for watching our video. If you like our content, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, okay? Well, since Trump took office as President of the United States, he has been adopting a very hostile posture toward Ukraine, wanting to reapproach Russia. But I told the folks on Mundo de Revolução that, look, I agree, it's wrong, it's absurd, Russia is the aggressor in this war. So there's no justification for anyone to side with Russia. But I said that Trump would eventually reach the point where he would see that the only alternative is to help Ukraine. And in fact, that's exactly what happened. He started by heavily criticizing Zelensky, saying that Zelensky had to go, that Zelensky was wrong, and so on. But as time went by, he gained a better understanding of what was happening there, and then he realized that there was no other way and started negotiating with the elected officials, who have already started sending weapons. New weapons are already arriving in Ukraine, which were not from the batch approved by Biden, but weapons that were approved by the Trump administration. Anyway, but then in recent days, suddenly Trump was heading in the right direction, supporting Ukraine and all that, criticizing Putin for the attacks on Ukrainian cities. So Trump was on the right path, had already, saying he would impose sanctions on Russia, impose sanctions on Brazil and India for buying Russian oil, and so on. He was on the right path. But then, suddenly, at some point last week, he changed course. No, but I'm going to meet with Putin and we're going to discuss. We're going to achieve peace. We're going to resolve this. We're going to end this whole thing. Let's have a meeting there in Alaska. And the Ukrainian people were terrified. Why? Because what's the concern with this whole thing? That Trump would negotiate something with Putin like, I don't know, trading Donetsk for Zaporizhia or something like that without consulting the Ukrainians, right? And then later he would push this on Ukraine and Ukraine would say, no, I won't accept this. All the territories are Ukrainian, obviously. Crimea, Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporizhia, Kherson, it's all Ukraine, right? If you want to trade territories, I don't know, it might be possible to negotiate, but it would be trading those territories for, I don't know, Kursk, Verdiansk, Belarus, something like that, I don't know. It's possible to negotiate something, but the fact is that Ukraine can't give up its territories. So there was a fear that Trump would strike a peace deal with Putin and then force Ukraine to accept such a terrible peace deal. And that would be very bad for Ukraine, obviously. But I've always said on Mundo M Revolução that there's no chance of that happening. Nothing will come of this. Why? Because Putin can't stop this war. I'll explain to you at the end of this video why Putin can't stop. He can't stop this war. He has to continue this war. So here's what happened. They arranged this meeting between Trump and Putin in Alaska. There were many protests by people there in Alaska. Alaska stands with Ukraine. This is a scene from South Park that shows Satan with Trump here. And they put Putin on the other side too. And lots of protests. Protests in Alaska, in Anchorage, where the meeting was held. But the meeting wasn't in the city. It was at the military base north of the city. More protests here. Protests here. More people protesting. Really. Many people in Alaska. And here's the thing. Alaska is a predominantly pro-Trump state, very Republican. But that's what I'm telling you. Even Republicans in the United States are pro-Ukraine. There's no other way, because there's just no other way. Anyone who stops and thinks about this war sees that Russia is wrong, can't keep invading the country. What kind of talk is that? But NATO, I don't know what else. Hell, then go fight NATO. Hell, why fight Ukraine? Anyway, this invasion is absurd, but fine. There were many protests. They set up the thing in a separate location at the airbase. So the day before, the Russian delegation arrived and stayed at the Anchorage base, that military base there. Look, Putin only arrived yesterday. He arrived on the day of the meeting, had the meeting, and went back to Russia. He didn't stay even a minute longer on a... But the rest of the delegation came the day before, and here's Lavrov wearing a Soviet Union shirt, CCCP. CCP is the Russian acronym for the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, the Soviet Union. Worse would be the Portuguese acronym. Anyway, he wore the shirt of the Soviet Union, but people were actually criticizing this, saying Trump didn't say anything because Lavrov wore a regular shirt. But this was before the meeting, right, folks? It's also not fair to compare, because remember when Zelensky met with Trump in that fateful meeting back in early March and was criticized because he wasn't wearing a suit. Why don't you wear a suit? Now people are saying, hey, but Lavrov isn't... This was the day before, right? Before the meeting. On the day of the meeting, Lavrov was wearing a suit. I think suits are complete nonsense. But anyway, there's no reason to compare the two situations. Anyway, he didn't miss the chance to take a jab at the United States because the Soviet Union was openly anti-American, right? Well, here come Trump and Putin. When they arrived, Russia had a limousine brought in. The Urus limousine, a Russian-made car just for Putin to travel from the plane to the venue. Man, look at this ridiculous thing. They brought an official car for him to travel. I don't know, 200 meters, something that makes no sense, but whatever. The money is theirs. The money isn't theirs. The money belongs to the Russian people. They're completely screwing over the Russian people, but anyway. Then on this road here, it's really funny because they passed among all the aircraft, the F-16s, F-22s, right? And it's really funny because at this Alaskan airbase, just at this Alaskan airbase, there's an air force larger than the entire Russian Air Force. The entire thing, Russia's entire aircraft capacity is smaller than this airbase. And the combat helicopters here also made Putin pass through all this force. This show of force here. Something, well, somewhat humiliating, right? Russia was considered at one time a superpower, right? Certainly nowadays, it's no longer seen as that nowadays. Russia is a broken third world country, right? Much worse than Brazil, for example, economically speaking, right? And then, as if that weren't enough also, when the G's... Here they come, Trump and Putin arriving at a platform where they went to meet people, and then notice how Putin blinked here. Putin blinked, man. Trump didn't even look to the side. Putin blinked when the B-2 arrived here. The B-2 bomber, right? It's that saying people have, right? Everything is fun and games until pixels start going missing in the sky, right? When pixels start going missing in the sky, my friend, things got serious, right? That must have given him that little scare to Putin there, right? But anyway, the B-2 flew by here, low flight. Must have been incredibly loud here. The video doesn't give the same impression, but those who are there in person experience it much louder, right? Impressive stuff. Well, in the end, both went up to the platform, greeted each other and all that. Traditional stuff, right? And there were already some journalists there, right? A journalist asked, Mr. Putin, did you underestimate Ukraine? And are you going to stop killing civilians and all that? Putin, I'm not hearing anything. I'm not understanding anything. Sorry. He played dumb, right? Acting like, oh, I'm confused, didn't understand anything. Mr. Putin, how can the United States trust your word? That's the big problem. With Russia, there's no way. You couldn't trust their word. They signed the Minsk Agreement in 2015. The idea was to negotiate how Russia would return Donbas and Crimea to Ukraine. Then they wanted to invade more. There's no way to trust Russia. Everyone knew this meeting wouldn't lead to anything. I was even afraid, I confess. I thought it wouldn't lead to anything. But there was that fear that he might do something wrong, that Trump with this idea of his, oh no, what am I going to do? I'm going to win the Nobel Peace Prize. Oh, I'm going to win the Nobel... Honestly, I tell you, the Nobel Peace Prize should be abolished. Get rid of this nonsense of a prize. It just serves for idiots to think it's worth something, right? It serves Putin, it serves Trump, and it serves Lula too, right? Anyway, but then that's what happened, right? They held the meeting. 6 hours of meetings were planned, and then there would be a press conference, and then there would be lunch between the Russian and American delegations. The meeting that was supposed to last 6 hours only lasted 3 hours. Well, 3 hours is a long meeting, I won't deny it. It's quite a long meeting, they discussed a lot there. But it was shorter than people expected. People thought it would be even longer, you know, so kind of, well, and more than that, there was no press conference. Instead, there was only a joint statement by Trump and Putin to the press. Why? What's the difference? The difference is that when there's a press conference, reporters ask Trump and Putin questions about the meeting, and they clarify any details and such. But that didn't happen. There was only a statement from Putin and a statement from Trump. So the meeting was shorter. They canceled the lunch. So there wasn't a lunch between the delegations, and they released this photo of people confirming whatever. The Kremlin confirmed that the talks were over, and they released a video of behind-the-scenes footage of the meeting and so on, and it seems like nothing came of it. The lunch between the United States and Russia was canceled. Trump returned to Washington, and Putin returned to Siberia. And then there was this meeting where Trump and Putin talked, and in the end they said nothing. They didn't reach any agreement, which was expected. Trump said they agreed on many points, but some were left undefined. They said 99% of the points are ready. It's like the peace agreement between Hamas and Israel, even with 99% of the points agreed upon. The remaining point won't be agreed upon. There's no agreement because Israel wants Hamas to leave the Gaza Strip. Hamas doesn't want to leave. There's no middle ground. The same thing happens with Russia and Ukraine. Russia wants to keep the Ukrainian territories. Ukraine will not cede any territory, not Crimea, not Donbas, it's all Ukraine, so there's no way to reach an agreement. You can reach 99% of the agreements, but the one that's missing is the most crucial, and you get nowhere, right? Anyway, Trump said he would call the NATO people, call the Greeks, that he would talk to them, and so on. At one point, Putin said, next time we'll be in Moscow, right? And Trump said, look, it could be, it's interesting, maybe it could happen. But you can clearly see that Trump left that meeting discouraged. Trump thought that his charm would be able to convince Putin to change his mind. But as I told you, my friend, the issue runs much deeper. Putin won't change his mind because he can't change his mind. What's the logic? Why can't Putin end this war? Because Putin mobilized the entire Russian society. The Russian economy is broken. Everyone's on the front line, a bunch of soldiers on the front line fighting, getting paid well, because when you pay a frontline soldier, you pay them well. What's Putin's problem? If he agrees to a ceasefire, if he stops this war now, what will happen? First, he didn't win the war. He lost it in March 2000. The moment he failed to take Kyiv when he withdrew from northern Ukraine, that's when he lost the war. There's no alternative. The only way to win the war isn't conquering territory. Conquering territory is irrelevant. Winning the war means achieving your strategic objective. What was Putin's strategic objective? It was precisely to overthrow the Ukrainian government and turn Ukraine into a Russian puppet state. And they had a plan for this. Launch a swift attack and capture Kyiv. But they failed. Ukraine resisted. Zelensky remained in Kyiv. Many people thought he would flee. Biden himself offered Zelensky the option to establish a government in exile. And such will evacuate you and establish a government in exile. No, I need ammunition, not a ride. And that's where Putin lost this war. Conquering pieces of the Donbas makes no difference whatsoever. If Putin ends this war now, what will happen? First, he failed to achieve his objective, and everyone knows it. And then masses of soldiers who were earning good money on the front lines will return. Now, they won't earn as much. They will return to a country with a shattered economy and soaring inflation. Remember, Russia's economy is smaller than Brazil's. Imagine if here in Brazil we maintained a massive military force, spending a fortune on bombs, aircraft, and ships, all sinking, all being destroyed, producing nothing. Imagine in the precarious situation we're in here in Brazil, still spending even more money on a war that brings no profit. The regions of Ukraine don't generate profit for Russia in the end. Look at what Putin would have. This bunch of armed soldiers, violent people, accustomed to the front lines, returning home with weapons and no salary, since the salary is now gone. With a devastated economy, what do you think would happen? Revolution was what happened every time this occurred in the Soviet Union. It happened with Nicholas II in 1916, 1917. It happened with Gorbachev. In 1989, whenever Russia loses a war, a bunch of armed and angry soldiers return because they lost the war. And even angrier because they no longer have a salary. And all armed, dangerous people, the government cannot withstand it, so that's Putin's problem. He cannot have peace. Putin's only chance is to continue this war indefinitely. Russia will enter a state of indefinite warfare because he thinks that at some point, Ukraine or the West will falter. They will not. Ukraine won't give in. So that's Putin's problem. That's why he won't make any peace. Putin's only way out is on a gallows. That is, the guy gets hanged and that's it. His people will hang him there. That's how Putin's way out will be. Well, in fact, everyone's view is that Putin seemed very upbeat at this conference. Trump not so much. Trump was expecting something from this conference. Putin wasn't expecting anything. Putin knew there wouldn't be any. Putin came to this conference with the expectation of delaying American sanctions. That's all he wanted. Those sanctions that Trump promised to impose on India, Brazil, and China, which buy Russian oil, Putin wanted to delay those. And he succeeded. He delayed it. At least for a while, he delayed it. And he knew he wouldn't get anywhere with this. So that's why Putin is upbeat. Trump is downbeat about this. There was no agreement, no sanctions, no repercussions, no questions from journalists. In other words, a complete flop. What's more, some people are thinking, look at this video they recorded of Putin here at a certain moment during the press conference. It wasn't the press conference, it was the statement from the officials here. Look at this, I don't know. Did they do something with artificial intelligence here? But no, there are a lot of people sharing this stuff here. A lot of people showing this image here. It seems like he's talking to someone, some journalist from Russia, right? I don't know what. How strange. People are saying that this is Putin's weakest clone, Putin's least important clone. Putin has a lot of clones, right? Like Stalin had too, like all these dictators have, right? So, look at this image here. Putin spoke, I don't know what, spoke to the journalist and so on. It got weird, right? People are posting comparative images here of Putin in Moscow, of Putin in Alaska, whether it was a clone. If it was a clone, it's even funnier because, there was no chance of anything happening, right? Trump thought he was going to talk to Putin but didn't say anything, right? And now that Putin has returned to Russia, there won't be any change. Nothing has changed. The war continues, Ukraine keeps winning, and Russia remains in a pitiful state, which will end up being destroyed quickly anyway. If you want to follow the war in Ukraine, I'll leave a link in the description of this video to my latest video about the war in Ukraine, but there are daily videos detailing how the front line stands, what has advanced, what problems have occurred, and what advantages have been gained. So, that's it. I hope Trump now realizes there's no other way. The only option Trump has is to arm Ukraine, and then this war will end. By arming Ukraine, putting a lot of money and weapons into Ukraine, Ukraine will completely overwhelm Russia. They might even invade Moscow and put an end to this mess, once and for all. Thanks for watching the video to the end. Besides liking, sharing, and subscribing to the channel, consider becoming a sponsor with amounts starting from $1.99. Click the Become a Member button below to learn about the conditions and benefits of sponsoring the channel. More information about our project is available on the websites displayed on screen.